Secretary. She is also one of the key people when it comes to formulation of the budget, and she actually sits in some of the big conversations around the investment decisions that Kenya will be considering to take in the event that we are looking for bilateral trade relations or receiving grants or aids in any fashion of the country. And well, the briefcase is there. Henry Rotich looking very energetic, excited, ready to present this year's budget. Quite a historic moment for him as he makes his way to Parliament buildings. And it will be interesting to see whether he'll be taking the Route 11, as people say. Will he be walking to Parliament or not? And I can see from the pictures, he's sort of making his way into, if I'm not wrong, a Passat. And, oh yes, he's standing by there, and he's very, very ready to go. As you can see, the budget briefcase is there. And we will be looking forward to ensuring that we give you our wall-to-wall coverage of this particular budget. Quite a scene there, reporters scrambling, trying to get a word from Rotich, but the security men have been able to contain this. And indeed, it is a Passat. And it also symbolizes the government's commitment towards ensuring that they sort of place a lead on government spending, where we did see the issues of Passats came into force, and when President Uhuru Kenyatta was actually in Treasury as the finance minister. And we continue to cover this coverage for you. Now we want to take you to Parliament, where Patrick Amimo is on standby to receive the CS for the National Treasury. Over to you, Amimo.
The CS... Already now the National Treasury CS Henry Rotich heading to Parliament with this briefcase, which contains the secret dossier on how he'll be able to realize the 3.07 trillion shillings budget for the 2018-2019 financial year. It is a budget that already has is about 534 billion shillings extra compared to what we had in the financial year that will be coming to close in about 2 weeks. Time, that is June 30th, which was 2.6 trillion shillings. So it is something that mostly from those analysts have said that probably the minister will have to depend on that domestic taxes, because as it were, the country currently is running on a debt of about 4.5 trillion shillings, and out of these at least we have to repay annually about 870 billion shillings to repay our debts. We have the country has to service its debt lest it is blacklisted. So it's something that it is a tough balancing act that the government will be looking into to see how everything goes. But as it were, already members of Parliament did the afternoon session convened at 2:30 as per tradition. Parliament, the House sits at 2:30. So members of Parliament in the National Assembly are waiting for the arrival of the CS at the plenary to start reading his statement to them and see how he will be mobilizing resources from various sectors to realize the development agenda for the coming year. Most of it to do development and recurrent expenditure. There is concern about the rising wage bill, which is almost approaching 50% of the budget money, and according to those the best international practices, it says that at least 30% should be able to service the wage bill and 70% goes to development. But now in our situation, it appears things are done in a reverse order. So it's something that those austerity measures will be put in place to ensure at least we tighten up our belts. There is concern about the hospitality industry still consuming a lot of money and those foreign travel, and I think that is an area that the government will be looking into to ensure that there is strict foreign travel and ensure that most of this money ends up benefiting the country in terms of development. So the vehicle of the CS is just approaching Parliament Road, as it were. Just now they are on Parliament Road with this chase car as it moves slowly with that convoy escorted by two outriders together with a police escort car and a chase car. That is now the CS Henry Rotich just arriving at the main gate of Parliament, making an entry. And on arrival at Parliament here, he will be met by the parliamentary leadership. Already I can see Leader of Majority, the National Assembly, Aden Duale, waiting patiently to receive him. And next to him is the chairperson of the Budget and Appropriations Committee, Kimani Ichung'wah. We also have the clerk of the National Assembly, Michael Sielai, who will be welcoming the Minister of the CS Treasury as he comes out of his vehicle just to meet. Coming out now, CS Rotich coming out of the ministry with Duale now, just welcoming the welcoming party. Already now they are just trying to get the nice ties as he goes to inside Parliament to share what he has for the country. So this is the welcoming party, Parliament leadership, just trying to be with the CS. He's already displaying his briefcase. This is briefcase there. Also, at least journalists present. They want to have at least a picture of that briefcase. You know, it was displayed. It was displayed on the steps of the National Treasury building. But here at Parliament, we did not have that opportunity to see this particular briefcase. And now, journalists here, the batch of journalists lined up here, are eager to have at least a snapshot of that briefcase again. I think it's this one that has secrets of how the government will be able to fund the 3.07 trillion shillings budget for the 2018-2019 year. Journalists, the batch of journalists, very, very curious to see to have a picture of that particular briefcase. Already the CS lining up with the leadership of Parliament for that particular brief photo session on that with that briefcase before this Cabinet Secretary can head to the main chambers of the National Assembly to start making a speech with regard to this 2018-2019 budget. And it now seems that this particular the photo session will be about to end any time now, as members of the media, the fourth estate, try to get a clear, at least, image of that particular briefcase before the CS now leaves to the plenary. He's already going to the plenary just to await members of Parliament who are eagerly waiting to hear from him on how he intends to put the eyes, to put the dots on that particular missing gaps in this particular budget, on how he will intend to fill the budget. And already targeted as is the so-called sin tax, which people we expect maybe those who things to do with cigarettes, alcohol, beauty products will have to go up. And already if they slap 16% VAT on petroleum products, then we'll see the cost of transport fare also rise up, because this cost definitely will be transferred to the consumer. So it is the budget already that the CS Treasury getting into the main plenary to have that particular him read the statement as members of Parliament await for his memorable his speech on this particular epic day, where we have, at least for the first time this decade, I think we are now past the 3 trillion shillings sector, the biggest, the hugest one in the East African region, where other countries compared to our sister states in the East African community, I think some of them are doing below. They are yet to hit the trillion, the trillion shillings mark. So it is a budget that Kenyans are eager, are waiting across the country and in the region to see how this budget will merge with the rest of the community, because this time around it is a tradition in East Africa to have the budgets read on the same day to be in line with the camaraderie that exists in the region. So that is how things are happening here, as it were. But then the CS will briefly have a brief moment with the clerk of the National Assembly before he's escorted into the chambers to start making his official statements.
And Kenya becoming a market leader in terms of provision of healthcare. You got healthcare, you got manufacturing, both intertwined within the Big Four agenda. And one of the ways to do that is to encourage the local manufacturers by putting them at par with the foreigners in terms of the tax, the way their taxes are managed, and VAT. That discrepancy has obviously had a knock-on effect on them. Mr. Speaker, from the report it's very clear that there's been lots of consultation, and I know there's lots of, I can see KPMG, one of the auditors, Kenya Oil and Gas Association, Association of Gaming Operators of Kenya, PricewaterhouseCoopers. Again, these are all guys within the accounting world. That's my world. Kenya Wildlife Conservancies Association, Kenya Association of Manufacturers, Institute of Surveyors, Agrochemical Association of Kenya, Kipkend and Company Associates, Betting Control and Licensing Board. Yeah, it basically shows there's been heavy public participation in terms of the development of this bill, and Sports Bettors Association of Kenya, Federation of Kenya Pharmaceuticals, Kenya Revenue Authority, all these people did appear before this committee, and I'm very happy that the committee did listen to them and has concurred in terms of the issues that we need in commending this bill to us. So, Mr. Speaker, I know it's a very important bill. It's only a very small component of perhaps the tax things that need to be brought in. But and I do know that the committee at some point will be bringing in some of these, some of the amendments that they did agree on. And I'll leave that to the leadership of the committee and the members of the committee to prosecute that. But by and large, I do believe that these amendments that have been brought within the tax law are for the benefit of this country. And Mr. Speaker, with those words, I beg to support.
Yeah, member for Emuhaya, what's your point of order?
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. My point of order is that the mood in the House is that it's quite expectant. And even as Senior Honorable Kimunya spoke about the tax laws bill, you could see the attention of the House is not in the mood of concentration. How I wish to plead with the Chair, Honorable Speaker, yourself.
Well, those are live pictures from Parliament, and like you've rightly seen there, the Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich has already made his way into Parliament precincts, and he'll be appearing before Parliament in a short while just to table this year's budget. And with me, I continue to sit with a very distinguished panel where we'll be discussing some of the key highlights of the budget. And let me just pick it off from the entry of the Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich. And perhaps, how would you describe this year's budget, the mood it's coming under as a country?
I think, even given, I think, the Twitter feedback that we had from your colleague earlier and some of the sentiments from your colleagues all over, whether it's a slum area or whether it's Western Kenya or within Nairobi, I think there seems to be a general feeling that the budget is not addressing Wanjiku's needs, and the Mwananchi has somehow been left behind. But I think we also need to wait and see kind of what the direction the government is going in, because sometimes it appears as though the Mwananchi is left behind, but those incentives, that affordable housing, that universal healthcare should ultimately trickle down to everybody.
All right.
Yes.
Well, the CS Henry Rotich has already entered the Parliament buildings, and as you can see live pictures there, he is just in a few moments he'll be actually invited to make his budget statement for the financial year of 2018-2019. A full packed house, as you can see, indeed a sitting of the Committee of the Whole Houses, where we are seeing a significant turnout, even as the Speaker of the National Assembly, Justin Muturi, is addressing Parliament right now. Let's listen in on this.
Yesterday, Wednesday, 13th of June 2018, this House concluded a fairly taxing and meticulous process of allocating funds to various boards in the national government, comprising of the executive, the judiciary, and Parliament, to finance their respective programs during the year ending 30th June 2019. This is a process that is commonly referred to as the Committee of Supply in most Commonwealth jurisdictions. Honourable members, the conclusion of the supply process is followed by a public pronouncement of the policy highlights contained in the approved budget. More importantly, the pronouncement also includes the revenue-raising measures proposed by the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury to support the budget. Honourable members, Section 40, subsection 1 of the Public Finance Management Act of 2012, read together with our Standing Order number 244, Clause C, requires that, and I quote, each financial year, the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury shall, with the approval of Cabinet, make a public pronouncement of the budget policy highlights and revenue-raising measures for the national government. Further, Standing Order number 25, AA, relating to designation of a place in the chamber for cabinet secretaries and other persons, provides, and I quote, the Speaker may designate a suitable place in the chamber or at the bar of the House for the Cabinet Secretary responsible for finance to make a public pronouncement of the budget policy highlights and revenue-raising measures for the national government as contemplated under the Public Finance Management Act, close the quote. In this regard, honourable members, and in fulfillment of the requirement of the law and our own standing orders, I have designated a suitable place in the chamber to the right of Mr. Speaker's seat and adjacent to the public servants' benches to enable the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury to also discharge his obligation in compliance with the law. I now invite Mr. Henry Rotich, Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury, to occupy the seat next to Mr. Speaker and make pronouncement of the budget policy highlights and revenue-raising measures for the national government for the financial year 2018-2019. Cabinet Secretary, you're welcome, and you may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, it's my honor to present to this August House the budget statement for financial year 2018-2019. I make this statement in fulfillment of the requirement of Section 40 of the Public Financial Management Act 2012 and the Standing Order number 241 of the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, this is the first budget following the conclusion of the general election last year. Allow me to congratulate those who were re-elected and those who are serving for the first time in this August House. I look forward for working closely with all of you in order to achieve our development goals. Mr. Speaker, while delivering the State of the Nation address early this year, His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta reminded us of the journey we have traveled as a nation in building a stronger democratic society. This democracy has strengthened our collective belief in justice and our aspiration for an inclusive and shared prosperity. Mr. Speaker, as a country, we have come a long way since 2013. At that time, when His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta took office in 2013, there were numerous constraints to economic growth. For example, we had a huge infrastructure gaps in roads, rail, air transport, as well as challenges at our ports. Our capacity to generate energy was limited mainly to unreliable hydro and costly thermal sources. We needed to modernize our education sector to enable training of skilled manpower. Our health facilities were overstretched, with families struggling with communicable diseases and inadequate modern treatment facilities. Above all, we faced the challenge of rolling out the devolved system of government with 47 counties as enshrined in our Constitution. Mr. Speaker, faced with these challenges, the Jubilee administration designed and implemented an economic transformation plan under 5 key pillars involving 1, improving the business climate by maintaining macroeconomic stability addressing security challenges, reducing the cost of doing business. 2, closing the infrastructure gap. 3, investing in key sectors such as manufacturing, agriculture, and tourism. 4, sharing prosperity by investing in poor programs in health, education, and social welfare programs. And 5th, fully supporting devolution. The plan we chose in 2013 has worked and is delivering positive results to our people. Mr. Speaker, let me mention a few of the key achievements under that plan. During the past 5 years, our economy has expanded by an average of 5.6% per year, outperforming the average growth rate of previous 5 years of 2008-2012, and that of the global economy and of sub-Saharan Africa. We are now relishing the benefits of an expanded economy that's more competitive and well-rated, not only in the East African region, but also in the whole of Africa. We have completed phase 1 of the standard gauge rail, SGR. Today, Kenyans are enjoying cheaper and faster travels between Mombasa and Nairobi using Madaraka Express. In addition, the SGR freight service started in January 2018 has facilitated cheaper movement of goods, with the monthly loads increasing from the initial 22,345 metric tons to an impressive 213,559 metric tons, a 10-fold increase in only a few months. We have expanded our energy generation capacity through investment in green energy. Today, 6.7 million Kenyans have been connected to electricity compared to 2.3 in 2013. Security has been substantially improved throughout the country thanks to our strategic investments in police and military modernization. Our tourism sector continues on a recovery path, largely due to improved security in the country and effective tourism promotion strategies. We have significantly eased the burden of medical expenditure. As a result, more Kenyans are accessing specialized treatment than ever before. We have also made education more inclusive and sensitive to the country's skills demand by expanding the free education program to include free-day secondary education, to introduce a new curriculum that focuses on nurturing talent and delivering new and upgraded technical training institutes across the country. And finally, more vulnerable Kenyans are benefiting from cash transfers, especially our senior citizens, orphans, vulnerable children, and persons with disabilities. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding these significant achievements, we are aware that a lot remains to be done in order to decisively deal with the pressing challenges of unemployment, poverty, and inequality that Kenyans continue to face. It is for this reason that His Excellency the President has directed us to focus on 4 key strategic areas under the Big Four plan that will help create jobs and transform the lives of Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, achieving these strategic objectives will require that all of us will pull in the same direction. In this context, that His Excellency the President has urged us to put our differences aside, build bridges, and focus on serving our people for a better Kenya. This is a profound and timely call, consistent with the unifying vision of our forefathers. This has rekindled our sense of purpose and triggered a new sense of renewal. Mr. Speaker, consistent with this vision, the budget we present today is an opportunity to begin to walk this talk, and more importantly, to boldly confront the challenges we face today of getting employment for our youth, improving the lives of our people, and sharing the benefits of our economic progress. Accordingly, the theme of this year's budget is creating jobs, transforming lives, and sharing prosperity. Mr. Speaker, building a united nation is in which every Kenyan has a decent living, access to economic opportunities, and a chance to pursue their dreams is the pressing challenge facing us as a nation, and one that the budget must speak to. All of us, therefore, must heed the President's call to boldly address the underlying challenges and work hard together in order to achieve our national aspiration. Mr. Speaker, we must now seize the opportunity to accelerate our economic growth, create jobs for our youth, reduce poverty, and share our prosperity. This is because we have a government and a president who is fully committed to this resolve. We have a favorable global economic and trading environment. Our domestic economic outlook is bright. We have a fiscal plan that supports growth, provides funds for our devolved government while ensuring our debt remains sustainable. Our exchange rate, interest rates, and inflation outlook are stable. We have development partners that are ready to provide both financial and non-financial support. We have foreign investors knocking on our doors and eager to invest in our country. We have creative and enthusiastic homegrown entrepreneurs ready to expand their opportunities. And above all, our political environment has improved significantly over the recent months, thanks to the handshake. Mr. Speaker, in the budget for 2018-2019 that I will present shortly, we have balanced the need to provide resources to key priority areas to support enablers and drivers of a Big Four plan and accelerate economic growth, while at the same time ensuring that our public debt remain on a sustainable path. Mr. Speaker, given the compelling needs for our limited resources, given the competing needs of our limited resources, we have had to make tough choices. We have curtailed resources going to low priority areas following the zero-based budgeting approach that we have adopted. This has enabled us to redirect these savings towards the Big Four and their enablers, while continuing with proper expenditures in health, education, and protecting the vulnerable. We are clearly conscious of our limited fiscal space, and we will be leveraging on the partnership between the private sector and the government to deliver most of the Big Four requirements. Overall, we have moderated our spending and ensured cautious revenue projection so as to limit borrowing. Obviously, there are risks and spending pressures that we will need to manage prudently. Mr. Speaker, the rest of my statement focuses on economic context around which this budget is prepared and details of various strategies aimed at creating jobs and transforming the lives of Kenyans under the Big Four plan. Thereafter, I will broadly outline the fiscal policy and the budget framework for 2018-2019 budget, together with the tax proposals and priority expenditures, as well as critical structural reforms that we intend to implement. Mr. Speaker, we recently completed our third medium-term plan, MTP3, which will guide us in achieving sustainable development goals, as well as our Vision 2030 development objectives. Achieving our development agenda will require robust implementation of the policies and programs outlined under the Big Four plan. We need to do this by seizing the investment opportunities presented by the improving global and domestic environment. Global growth is projected to improve by 3.9. Global growth is projected to improve to 3.9% in 2018 and 2019 from 3.8% in 2017. This growth momentum is supported by a rebound in investment, trade, and industrial production, coupled with strengthened business and consumer confidence. Equally, Mr. Speaker, economic growth in sub-Saharan Africa is recovering, with growth projected at 3.4% in 2018, up from 2.8% in 2017. The improved global and regional economic outlook will benefit Kenya's exports, further strengthening our growth prospects, and most specifically, our manufacturing sector. As you will recall, Mr. Speaker, Kenya recently ratified the African Continental Free Trade Area. It's important that we take full advantage of this new trading frontier to further enhance Kenya's trade prospects in the region. Mr. Speaker, on the domestic front, we faced significant challenges last year, particularly the severe drought and the prolonged electioneering period. Despite these challenges, our economy remained resilient, expanding by 4.9% in 2017, supported by strong public investment and macroeconomic stability. As a result, we generated an additional 898,000 jobs, new jobs in 2017, up from 833,000 jobs in 2016. Mr. Speaker, we project the economy to grow by at least 5.8% this year, supported by growing investor confidence, improved agricultural activities, bolstered by favorable weather, ongoing public investment, and improved demand for our exports due to improved global and regional growth. Over the medium term, decisive implementation of the Big Four plan should result in faster economic growth of at least 7% per year, which in turn should support job creation and reduce poverty among Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, despite the extremely difficult circumstances we faced as a country last year, we were able to preserve macroeconomic stability with inflation, interest rates, and exchange rate remain largely stable throughout 2017. This serves as a clear demonstration to domestic as well as foreign investors of our commitment to maintain macroeconomic stability, which is key in enhancing investor confidence. We intend to sustain this commitment in the years to come. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to improve the environment of businesses to thrive, for businesses to thrive, deal decisively with corruption, and address the governance and performance challenges at our parastatus and state-linked companies, as well as improve efficiency in our financial sector. All these measures will boost investment and create the much-needed jobs. Mr. Speaker, under the Big we target to boost manufacturing activities, enhance food and nutrition security, achieve universal health coverage, and support the construction of at least 500,000 affordable houses by 2022. On manufacturing, Mr. Speaker, we plan to increase the contribution of the manufacturing sector to GDP to 15% by 2022 by adding between US $2 to $3 billion to our GDP. It is expected that this will increase manufacturing sector jobs by more than 800,000. Mr. Speaker, this will be achieved through establishing leather parks and textile industries in various parts of the country, reviving and transforming industries such as blue economy and manufacturing of construction materials, and reestablishing the automobile industry, which will make new vehicles more affordable. Mr. Speaker, we will target investors that are ready to invest in specific areas by providing tailor-made incentives, some of which are in my tax proposal that I will outline in this statement. Already, one investor is setting base in Eldoret, benefiting from incentives offered under the Special Economic Zones Act. The government will provide land in Naivasha for potential investors interested in setting up their activities in the Special Economic Zone to benefit from the SGR and cheap geothermal power generated nearby. We will also conclude the mode of financing the development of the Dongo Kundu Special Economic Zone in Mombasa, among others. Mr. Speaker, we are taking action to remove non-trade barriers within the East African Community region. Together with our East African partner states, we are working on the framework for the implementation of the East African Community Non-Tariff Barriers Act 2017. In addition, we have established an online reporting mechanism for non-tariff barriers. Further, we have embarked on the review of the common external tariffs to enhance protection of industries in the region that is expected to be completed in the coming financial year. Meanwhile, we have stay of application on some of the sensitive products before completion of the review. Mr. Speaker, in order to reduce the cost of production for our manufacturers, we have cut the cost of off-peak power by half, and we plan to implement modalities of bringing the cost of energy to about 9 cents per kilowatt hour to selected investors. We are reviewing work permits to accommodate expatriates whose skill supports our development agenda. We will continue to expand infrastructure and land access targeting manufacturing zone. Mr. Speaker, illicit and counterfeit trade rob us of revenue to fund critical programs and retard our progress towards industrialization. To deal with this, our multi-agency team, comprising of the Kenya Bureau of Standards, Kenya Revenue Authority, and Anti-Counterfeit Agency, are coordinating efforts to identify, seize, and destroy counterfeit goods. Already, the actions taken have yielded results. On food security, Mr. Speaker, we plan to grow enough food to feed our people at affordable price. Achieving this will require enhancing large-scale production by placing an additional 700,000 acres of land through PPP and by promoting investments in post-harvest handling, as well as adopting contract farming and other commercial off-taking arrangements, including supporting the development of agro-parks and hubs to serve as a link to farmers and markets. Mr. Speaker, we will also support smallholder farmers by upscaling crop and livestock insurance and promoting use of appropriate farming techniques, in addition to availing affordable credit facilities. On housing, Mr. Speaker, access to adequate and affordable housing remain a key concern in Kenya. It is estimated that the country's urban centers face a shortage of 200,000 housing units annually, and this shortage will rise to 300,000 units by 2020 on current policies. At the moment, only about 50,000 new housing units are being constructed every year. Mr. Speaker, every Kenyan has a right to a decent shelter. To meet this requirement, we plan to increase the supply of affordable houses by partnering with the private sector to develop homes in service land. This will require reforms in property registration, access to affordable financing, and adoption of new low-cost building technologies, which we are prepared to undertake under the Big Four plan. Already, Mr. Speaker, with a view to extending long-term loans to financial institutions secured against mortgages, we have established the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company, KMRC, which will be jointly owned by the government, the private sector, and select development partners. This company was incorporated in April this year and has started raising capital. Mr. Speaker, we have also developed a comprehensive housing package that will incentivize the private sector in the construction of low-cost housing. This includes reduction of the corporate tax rate to 15% for developers who construct at least 100 units per year. Additionally, we plan to establish a national social housing development fund and strengthen the National Housing Corporation to take up more strategic roles in resource mobilization and management of tenant purchase schemes and provide alternative financing strategies for low-cost housing and associated social and physical infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, in order to promote development of low-cost housing for Kenyans, I propose to amend the Employment Act to provide that an employer shall contribute to the National Housing Development Fund in respect of each employee in his or her employment of 0.5% of the employee's gross monthly emolument, subject to a maximum of 5,000 shillings, while the employee will contribute 0.5% of their monthly gross earnings. Mr. Speaker, we intend to roll out universal health coverage to all households by 2022, so as to guarantee access to quality and affordable health care. This will involve reconfiguring the National Hospital Insurance Fund and reforming the governance of private insurance companies to align them to the universal health care. Mr. Speaker, His Excellency the President has already launched a comprehensive NHIF medical scheme for secondary school students to insure them for all kinds of injuries and diseases. We expect this to ease the financial burden of their parents. Mr. Speaker, working with counties, we shall scale up the provision of specialized medical equipment and increase the number of health facilities at the community level, including mobile health services, in order to increase access to specialized health care. Mr. Speaker, we plan to expand the Linda Mama program to mission hospitals and private hospitals to enlist community health volunteers to help in healthcare service provision at grassroots level. We will also continue to train more doctors while sourcing specialized skill from outside to address existing gaps. Mr. Speaker, in the next 1 year, we will undertake a universal health coverage pilot in 4 counties, namely Kisumu, Nyeri, Isiolo, and Machakos. The lessons learned from the pilot in terms of capacity of NHIF and the requirement on infrastructure, commodities, and personnel will inform the rollout of all rollout to all the counties in the subsequent years. Mr. Speaker, we acknowledge the limited budgetary space to implement the Big Four plan. As such, we will leverage on the partnership, especially through the PPP framework with the private sector and development partners. Mr. Speaker, our development partners have supported us in various projects that have uplifted our living standards. We value this support very much. We will be engaging with them in the spirit of true partnership to make the Big Four plan a reality. Already, many of our development partners are funding projects within the Big Four sectors. But in addition to that, and with a view to mobilizing additional resources, they have indicated their willingness to review the rest of their portfolio to align them with the Big Four plan. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to the fiscal policy and budget framework for 2018-2019 budget and the medium term. Mr. Speaker, in this financial year, ending June 2018, we estimate a fiscal deficit of 7.2% of GDP, down from 9.1% of GDP in the previous year. This reduction in the deficit was despite additional expenditure requirement arising from the severe drought, prolonged electioneering period, and the implementation of several collective bargaining agreements, combined with shortfall in revenue collection. Mr. Speaker, in order to recoup the revenue shortfalls during the first half of this year, we agreed on a number of revenue enhancement initiatives with the Kenya Revenue Authority in February this year. With the additional funding of 4.3 billion from the National Treasury, KRA committed to collect additional revenue of 74 billion Kenya shillings, by end of June this year. By April 2018, KRA had collected 33 billion, and we expect them to deliver the remaining revenue yield by end June 2018. Mr. Speaker, going forward, now that the challenges we faced in last 2 years are behind us, we plan to bring down the deficit progressively to ensure that our public debt remains sustainable. Mr. Speaker, under this fiscal consolidation plan, we project the fiscal deficit to narrow to 5.7% of GDP in 2018-2019 from the estimated 7.2% of GDP in 2017-2018 financial year, and further to around 3% of GDP by 2021-2022 financial year. As such, this will help stabilize the net present value of debt to GDP ratio at below 50%, which is well below the 74% threshold considered to signal any unsustainable debt position. Mr. Speaker, strengthening revenues through tax policy measures is at the core of achieving the fiscal targets. Our revenue administration measures are also key. I will outline some of these measures shortly. Mr. Speaker, with revenue enhancement measures, we project revenue to rise by 17.5% to 1.9 trillion Kenya shillings, equivalent to 20% of GDP in financial year 2018-2019, from the estimated 1.659 trillion collected in this financial year. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to strengthen expenditure control and improve the efficiency of public spending through public financial management reforms in order to free fiscal space for priority social and economic projects. In particular, Mr. Speaker, we plan to address the challenges we face in project identification, preparation, and execution, which have been responsible for delays, cost overruns, and pending bills. Towards this end, we have established a public investment and management unit at the National Treasury to improve the management and the budgeting of public development projects. This unit will ensure that all the projects in the budget are appraised before they are committed. This will improve efficiency of our public investment, streamline spending, and reduce waste. Mr. Speaker, this year we'll witness the implementation of the second phase of the salary review following the 2017 job evaluation by the Salaries and Remuneration Commission, SRC. We commit to stay on this path so that we can contain the public sector wage bill. Mr. Speaker, given our expenditure containment measures, we project the total expenditure of 2.55 trillion Kenya shillings, equivalent to 26.3% of GDP in 2018-2019. Of this, recurrent expenditure will amount to 1.5 trillion, equivalent to 15.9% of GDP. Development expenditure is projected at 625 billion, equivalent to 6.4% of GDP, and transfers to county governments will amount to 376.4 billion, equivalent to 3.9% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, the deficit of 558.9 billion, equivalent to 5.7% of GDP, will be financed by net external financing amounting to 287 billion Kenya shillings, equivalent to 3% of GDP, while other domestic financing will amount to 271.9 billion Kenya shillings, equivalent to 2.8% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to diversify the sources of funding of our development budget over the medium term by maintaining a presence in the international capital market. We will seek to maximize our access to official development assistance on concessional terms while limiting use of non-concessional and commercial external borrowing to development projects with high financial and economic return. Mr. Speaker, as you are aware, this House has reviewed the 2018-2019 budget estimates that I submitted on April 26, 2018. I want to thank the Budget and Appropriation Committee and all departmental committee for interrogating the estimates. Based on the Budget and Appropriation Committee report adopted by the House, the Committee of Supplies has now approved the estimates, paving the way for finalization of the appropriation bill. Today, I submit the Finance Bill 2018, which contains the taxation and financial proposals, along with other documents for consideration and approval by this august House. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to the various tax measures that I intend to introduce through the Finance Bill 2018 to realize the objectives set out in the Big Four plan. Mr. Speaker, the tax proposals that I am submitting through the 2018 Finance Bill are designed to generate an additional 27.5 billion Kenya shillings in tax revenue for financial year 2018-2019. In addition, the proposed tax measures are intended to incentivize the achievement of the Big Four plan and offer strategic incentives. Mr. Speaker, allow me to highlight some of the tax proposals in this budget. Mr. Speaker, during the East African Community EAC pre-budget consultation meetings, we agreed on custom duties aimed at promoting industrialization, encouraging local investment, and creating incentives in agricultural and manufacturing sectors. The measures are also intended to make our products more competitive, while at the same time protecting local industries from unfair competition. Mr. Speaker, details of the custom measures will be communicated through the East African Gazette and implementation from for implementation from 1st July this year. I will highlight just a few of them. Mr. Speaker, our iron ore and steel industry is facing stiff competition from imported cheap and subsidized iron and steel products. In order to protect the local iron and steel industries, I have increased the rate of import duty from 25% to 35% in a wide range of steel and iron products which are available in the region. Mr. Speaker, Kenya has sufficient capacity to produce some paper and paper products which require protection. To protect manufacturers of these products, I have increased the rate of import duty from 25% to 35% on some paper and paperboard produced in the region. Mr. Speaker, our textile and footwear sector are closing down due to increased unfair competition from cheap imported textile and footwear, as well as second-hand clothing and footwear. In order to encourage local production and create jobs for our youth in the sector, I have introduced a specific rate of import duty of $5 per unit, or 35%, whichever is higher. This should guard against undervaluation. Mr. Speaker, to protect the timber and furniture industry from proliferation of cheap timber products and to enhance the local production, I have introduced a specific rate of duty of $110 per metric tons on particle board and US dollars 120 per metric ton on medium density fiber board, and US dollars 230 per cubic meter on plywood, and US dollars 20 per meter on block boards, or an ad valorem duty of 35%, whichever is higher. Mr. Speaker, on local manufacturers, Mr. Speaker, our local manufacturers have adequate capacity to manufacture vegetable oil to meet regional demand. To protect local manufacturers from imported cheap vegetable oils, I have introduced a specific rate of US dollars 500 per metric tons or 35%, whichever is higher. Mr. Speaker, pests and vectors continue to pose a great risk to crop and animal production. Despite our potential to produce pesticides and acaricides locally, we continue to import them. To encourage local production, I have allowed manufacturers of these products to import raw materials and inputs under the EAC duty remission scheme. Mr. Speaker, currently, the law provides for exemptions of duty for some selected vehicles for the transport of tourism. To boost tourism and provide a platform to market our national brand worldwide, the exemption will now be expanded to include sightseeing buses and overland trucks imported by licensed tour operators. Mr. Speaker, majority of our people rely on firewood for cooking. This has a significant negative impact on our forests as well as adverse health effects. To make clean and healthy cooking methods, such as use of cooking stoves, affordable, and encourage local production of clean cooking stoves. Inputs and raw materials for assembly of clean energy cooking stoves imported by local manufacturers will be imported under a duty remission of 100%. This will promote local production of clean energy cooking stoves and make them affordable to our people. Mr. Speaker, the East African Common External Tariff, which sets out the rates of duty applicable on imported goods, is undergoing a comprehensive review with the intention of enhancing protection of industries in the region as well as creating a conducive environment for investors. Mr. Speaker, the EAC Custom Management Act 2004 is also undergoing review as envisaged at inception. The review is expected to incorporate new developments as well as address challenge in the implementation of the law. This will enhance efficiency in custom administration in the region. Mr. Speaker, let me now move to the VAT. Mr. Speaker, during the 2017 budget speech, I proposed to exempt from VAT materials for the construction of grain storage facilities in order to support safe storage of foods and ensure sustainable food security in the country. In this budget, Mr. Speaker, I propose to expand this exemption to include equipments used in the construction of the facilities in order to lower the cost of post-harvest storage. This will go a long way in supporting the food security pillar under the Big Four plan. Mr. Speaker, while animal feeds are exempt from VAT, some of the raw materials used in their manufacture are taxable. This treatment has led to high prices of animal feeds. Thus, to make animal feed affordable to farmers and attract more manufacturers to invest in the sector, I propose to exempt these raw materials from VAT. Mr. Speaker, information communication technology continues to play a big role in supporting the growth of our economy and thus making Kenya a regional ICT hub. To support the assembly of laptops under the primary school program, I exempted parts imported on purchased parts imported or purchased locally for the assembly of these laptops in the country. In order to further promote the penetration of ICT in our economy, I propose to further exempt from VAT parts imported or purchased locally for the assembly of computers. This will encourage local manufacturing, innovation, and job creation. Mr. Speaker, let me move now to the excise duty. Mr. Speaker, private passengers motor vehicles fall under two categories: the high and low engine rating vehicles. Currently, excise duty is charged uniformly on these motor vehicles irrespective of the engine rating. To ensure progressivity, which is a cardinal principle of taxation, I propose to increase excise duty from 20% to 30% on private passenger motor vehicles whose engine capacity exceeds 2,500 cc for diesel and 300,000 cc for petrol-powered vehicles. Mr. Speaker, our economy has a well-established financial sector in the region with significant sums of money transferred monthly. In order for the government to get a fair share of revenue from these financial activities and to finance critical government programs, I propose to introduce a Robin Hood tax of 0.05% of any amount of 500,000 shillings or more transferred through banks and other financial institutions. In addition, I have increased excise duty fee charged on money transfer services by cellular phone service providers from 10% to 12%. The revenue realized from these measures shall be used to fund universal health care. Mr. Speaker, under the Excise Duty Act,
Order, members, order, order.
Mr. Speaker,
The CS shall be heard in silence.
Mr.
You may applaud or express surprise, but only for 10 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, under the Excise Duty Act, illuminating kerosene attracts a duty rate of 7,205 Kenya shillings per 100 liters, while gas oil is subject to excise duty at a rate of 10,305 per 100 liters. Mr. Speaker, the difference in the rates applicable to these two petroleum products has led to adulteration of the fuel products, resulting in loss of excise duty revenue to the exchequer. Mr. Speaker, in order to reduce the incidence of adulteration of fuel, I propose to harmonize the rate of excise duty applicable on illuminating kerosene to 10,305 per 1,000 litre. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to the income tax. Mr. Speaker, in the recent years, we have implemented tax reforms aimed at modernizing tax legislation and simplification of tax administration. In this pursuit, most of the tax statutes have been reviewed with the exception of the Income Tax Act. We are currently in the process of undertaking a comprehensive review of the Income Tax Act, and we now have a new draft bill that has undergone public participation in accordance with the constitutional requirement. Mr. Speaker, in the Income Tax Bill 2018, I had proposed to introduce a higher tax band of 35% on income above 750 per month, and an increase of the capital gain tax from 5 to 20%. However, during the public consultation on the bill, members of the public raised concern on this proposal and were of the view that the higher rates are not appropriate at this time. We have considered this concern and resolved to revert to the rates contained in the current income tax. Mr. Speaker, we are finalizing the draft bill, then seek approval from the Cabinet before submitting to this House by the end of July 2018. I propose to make limited amendments to the Income Tax Act with a view to address critical issues on revenue gaps and to expand the tax base. Mr. Speaker, the informal sector in our economy is expansive and remains out of the tax net. The Finance Act 2006 introduced taxation of the sector through turnover tax. However, this system of taxation has largely been unsuccessful, and the level of compliance have remained low due to the profile of the sector. I propose to amend the income tax to replace the turnover tax with a presumptive tax based on the business permit or trading license fee at a rate of 15% in order to ensure that the sector contributes towards the economic agenda of the country. Mr. Speaker, in the Tax Laws Amendment Bill 2018, I have proposed to introduce withholding tax on winnings. However, the proposal did not provide how the revenue realized from this measure will be applied. I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to clarify that the revenue realized from the taxes on winnings shall be used for development of sports, arts, cultural activities for the youth, as well as critical socio-economic initiatives, including universal health care. Mr. Speaker, the Port of Mombasa is the gateway to East and Central Africa and is one of the busiest ports along the East African coastline. The port provides direct connectivity to over 80 ports worldwide, attracting various service providers, particularly the shipping lines. Under the current legislative framework, payment for such services, which represent income from Kenya, are not subject to tax. This creates an unfair playing field for residents of Kenya whose income from similar sources are subject to tax. I therefore propose to amend the Income Tax Act to subject payment for demurrage charges made to non-resident persons to withholding tax at a rate of 20%. Mr. Speaker, Kenya represents one of the Africa's most well-developed and best regulated insurance market. General insurance is about twice the life insurance penetration, and the assets have grown over time. Some streams of income from this sector, including payment to non-resident persons and capital gains made by general insurance, are not taxed under the current legal framework. Mr. Speaker, I propose to introduce capital gain tax on transfer of property by general insurance companies. In addition, I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to introduce 5% tax on insurance premium paid to non-residents, excluding insurance premium paid for insurance of aircraft. Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to attract investors into the country. To facilitate investment by targeted investors, the government will provide special fiscal incentives through a special operating framework arrangement that outlines the special conditions and deliverables that are measurable and with specific timelines that must be met. Mr. Speaker, I propose to develop a framework to introduce special incentives in the VAT Act, Excise Duty Act, and Miscellaneous Fee and Levies Act, and provide a preferential tax rate under the Income Tax Act in order to encourage investment. Mr. Speaker, the government is dedicated to support the manufacturing sector as a pillar of the Big Four plan. The manufacturers have raised concern regarding the high cost of electricity. The government is committed to reducing this cost to support the manufacturing sector. Mr. Speaker, in order to mitigate the cost of production, I propose to amend the income tax to provide a deduction of 30% of the total electricity bill by manufacturers from corporate profits, in addition to normal deductions subject to the conditions to be set by the Ministry of Energy. Mr. Speaker, in 2016, the Tax Procedure Act was amended to provide a tax amnesty on income declared on the year 2016 by a person who earned taxable income outside Kenya. In 2017, I extended the period for applying for amnesty from 30th December 2017 to 30th of June 2018 for the year of income 2016. However, despite the extension, the uptake of the amnesty has been low, partly due to the concern that when the monies are returned, questions will be raised regarding the source as required by the Financial Reporting Center. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, and in order to encourage the uptake of the amnesty, I propose to extend the period of the amnesty from 30th June 2018 to 30th June 2019, and the year of income declaration to be 2017. Further, I propose to provide the funds transferred. That funds transferred under the amnesty shall be exempt from the provisions of the Proceeds of Crime and Anti-Money Laundering Act and any other act relates to reporting and investigation of financial transactions to the extent of the source of the funds. Mr. Speaker, these exemptions, however, does not extend to proceeds of terrorism, poaching, and drug trafficking. Mr. Speaker, despite imposing a 1% late payment interest on unpaid taxes, we have noted that a number of taxpayers are filing returns without payment of the taxes due. I am therefore proposing to amend the Tax Procedure Act to increase the rate of late payment interest to 2% and also introduce a 20% late payment penalty. This will promote tax compliance among taxpayers and boost our revenue mobilization efforts to avail the much-needed funds to support the Big Four plan. Mr. Speaker, the government has been working on simplifying and facilitating filing of self-assessment tax returns by taxpayers. In order to enhance the process of submission of tax returns through the iTax system, I propose to amend the Tax Procedure Act to provide for time limit in the application and extension of time to file a return, as well as allow taxpayers to amend the self-assessment return. Mr. Speaker, in the year 2015, I exempted regulatory authorities from payment of corporate tax and provided that these authorities remit 90% of their surpluses to the consolidated fund. However, these regulatory authorities have not been consistent in remitting the surplus to the consolidated fund. In this regard, I propose to amend the Kenya Revenue Act and the Public Financial Management Regulations to allow Kenya Revenue Authority to collect surpluses from the regulatory authorities and remit them to the consolidated fund promptly. Mr. Speaker, currently there is no penalty on interest on payment of taxes in betting, lotteries, and gaming sector, which has led to non-compliance. In order to ensure compliance and prompt payment of taxes, I propose to introduce a 20% penalty and 2% interest on late payment of tax in betting, lotteries, and gaming act. This will enhance the collection of these taxes that are meant to support sports, arts, culture, and social development activities in our country. Mr. Speaker, one of the pillars under the Big Four plan is to promote manufacturing activities. To achieve this, it is important to support value addition through measures to retain raw materials like scrap metals in order to protect local manufacturers and stem the tide against vandalism of public infrastructure. In this regard, I propose to introduce an export levy of 20% on copper waste and scrap metals. Mr. Speaker, allow me now to turn to how government will spend the resources in this budget. As stated earlier, total spending will increase from 2.3 billion 2.3 trillion in financial year 2017-2018 to 2.5 trillion in 2018-2019. In relation to GDP, this represents a reduction from 26.8% of GDP to 26.3%, consistent with our fiscal consolidation plan. Mr. Speaker, despite the planned fiscal consolidation, resource allocation criteria was aimed at ensuring that funding to the Big Four plan was prioritized. In total, I have allocated 460 billion to Big Four sector drivers and enablers. We have also sustained prioritization of resources to other pro-poor programs such as social protection, education, access to electricity, and drought mitigation measures. Mr. Speaker, the specific incentives under the Special Economic Zone Act and other special incentives, together with the PPP arrangement, will draw in investors into the manufacturing sectors. To catalyze this, the government will provide the enabling infrastructure, including building industrial sheds. To this end, I have allocated 400 million for the leather industrial park development and 400 million for textile development. Mr. Speaker, to modernize facilities in Rotich and the new KCC, we have allocated 1.4 billion and 200 million respectively. Mr. Speaker, to enhance food and nutrition security and modernize agriculture, I have allocated 1.4 billion for strategic food reserves, 1.9 billion for Kenya Cereal Enhancement Program, and 0.5 billion for mechanization of agriculture, and 900 million for crop diversification. Mr. Speaker, the severe droughts that we experienced last year underscores the importance of reducing our reliance on rain-fed agriculture. Mr. Speaker, in order to reduce our vulnerability to drought and bring additional land under crop production, I have allocated a total of 8.5 billion for ongoing irrigation projects in Bur and Mwea, national expanded irrigation programs, and smallholder irrigation programs Galana, Kulalu, Turkana, and micro irrigation in schools. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to improve accessibility of fertilizer and crop insurance. To this end, I have set aside 4.3 billion for subsidized fertilizer, 300 million to support crop insurance schemes in order to cushion farmers against climate-related risk, and 300 million for fall armyworm mitigation. On subsidized fertilizer, I expect the Ministry of Agriculture to reform the supply chain systems and ensure better service to farmers with the ongoing registration of farmers. Mr. Speaker, to further expand access to affordable health care, I have allocated 2 billion to free primary health care, 800 million for health insurance subsidy program, and 2.5 billion for rollout of universal health coverage to 4 counties on a pilot basis. Mr. Speaker, to continue with the initiative of His Excellency the President on universal health care, we have provided a total of 13.7 billion to further support the free maternal health care program and leasing of medical equipment. Mr. Speaker, in view of the increasing cases of cancer-related deaths, early screening and management is imperative. We have allocated 7 billion for leasing of computed tomography scanners equipment, which will help diagnose the disease at an early stage and cap cancer deaths. I have also allocated 400 million for the establishment of the Cancer Institute. Mr. Speaker, other allocations to improve health service delivery include 2.9 billion for doctors, clinical officers, nurses internship program, 11.7 billion for Kenyatta National Hospital, 7.7 billion for Moi Teaching and Referral Hospital, and 2.2 billion for Kenya Medical Research Institute, and 4.7 billion for Kenya Medical Training Center. Mr. Speaker, on affordable housing program, the initiative we plan to implement will draw private sector involvement to develop housing units that a majority of Kenyans can afford. Mr. Speaker, to roll out the housing program, we have provided 3 billion Kenya shillings for construction of affordable social housing units by the government, and 1.5 billion for construction of housing units for police and Kenya prisons. We have also provided 1.5 billion for the Civil Servants Housing Scheme Fund to support the offtake of the housing units. Mr. Speaker, we plan to provide infrastructure and utilities to urban land owned by national and county governments and invite the private sector to develop affordable housing units. To this end, we will restructure the Kenya Urban Support Program, Kisumu Urban Projects, and Nairobi Metropolitan Services Improvement Project to provide 18.4 billion to support the servicing of land in various towns in the country to bring in private developers into the affordable housing program. Mr. Speaker, as I stated earlier, the government has successfully implemented the economic transformation agenda during the last 5 years. This has